Welcome back. In this video, this is kind of going to be like a part 2 to the time before time. I zoomed out from that spot where I was at in the last video, and I just wanted to show there's this very distinct band that runs through this area. And you can actually zoom out and you can kind of see it all pulls from this and pulls, just to give you an idea of what was causing some of these more intense features and why Michael Steinbacher thought to think of this area over here while he was looking at something over here, even though they seem very distant. Similar patterns arise. But anyway, while we're talking about patterns, coming back and looking at some of these references that Velikovsky had. This region we were looking at on the map is over in Sinai. And Velikovsky mentions that Sinai owes its name to Sin, which is the Babylonian moon god. And when you think about that in terms of what might have happened to the Earth when the moon first arrived, you can kind of see someone appeared to be blaming whatever was taking place in the heavens on humanity, so to say. And this is still happening today, only it's not happening from the group you would expect. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. Looking at this scale, I started to question my original views from the scientific community, most notably going back to the debates between the uniformitarians and the catastrophists. Now, coming over here to the Cambrian explosion, this has nothing to do with the Big Bang. But here we have a situation that kind of goes against the uniformitarian mentality, because all the major life pretty much on Earth comes from this one period in time. Everything else is kind of like an adaptation after that. Now, in terms of evolutionary theory, they're saying it's slow and gradual progression, and over time we evolve to whatever we were at, wherever we are today. Evolution implies a gradual progression. This seems like everything just burst out of nowhere. Coming back over to Pangaea Earth and explaining this from the tidally locked perspective. You have the water on the near side. Not in a solar system like we are today. Well, maybe not. But I would suggest that this might have happened around a flaring red dwarf star, possibly Saturn, according to other theories that are out there, but also according to potentially the water on Earth. We'll talk more about that, but that's not what I wanted to talk about in relation to the water back in Pangaea. Because they talk about how all life arose from the water. And if you have a situation like this, now you're exposing one side always to these intense flares. That's going to be accompanied by increased exposure to intense electromagnetic radiation, which is known to cause genetic mutations. And if you're doing this, normally they act like this is not good for the habitability around a red dwarf system. But, as I was saying here, The water is absorbing the microwaves, but it's also emitting. It's going to reflect some of the intense radiation to prevent direct exposure to the inhabitants of land, but even to the inhabitants of sea. Now, another video I had already been exposed to was this over here, where Dr. Luc Montagnier he's continuing on somebody else's work, and he's explaining about how water has a memory, but it's not, he's focused more on water in the equation, but keep in mind they are sending electromagnetic signals. The EMS of low frequencies, they're detecting this from DNA. The DNA is emitting electromagnetic signals into the water, which the water is storing that information. The water, or they take samples, dilute it several times, and what they're saying is they can actually still pick up the information that's being stored in the water and transmit this information. That's why they're calling it teleportation. But what they're doing, they're able to reassimilate the DNA structure basically by emitting an electromagnetic signal. Why is this important? There's a bunch of implications he talks about, but this, this goes back to another scientist named Benveniste, and they actually explain more about it in the presentation. Here's another very interesting name to look into, Dr. Masaru Emoto. He's the guy who he transmits signals and into water, freezes them, and then you'll see the patterns. It's kind of like a cymatics in slow motion, sort of. But all this stuff seems like it's far-fetched, but when you're applying it to a situation like this, you're sending in signals to the water that we're not in this condition anymore. And there may have been times where we were going through more harsh conditions, like if we were traveling through the interstellar medium around a red dwarf star. This actually implies some other stuff too, which I'm going to have to talk about in terms of megaliths, because it seems like somebody knows and they're teasing us. They're throwing it in our faces and teasing us about it. But like, there's definitely a way to show tidal locking as a product of nature if you come over to the Pangaea Earth arrangement. But when you consider the water on the one side of the planet, again, they're saying when you come over here, they're saying that tidal locking is not good for the habitable life of the planet. I'm saying it's like the complete opposite. I'm saying this is almost, we need this. Not just in space, but for our own system. Because like he was saying, the water is absorbing these microwaves, transmitting the signals. So when you come over to the Cambrian explosion, we were probably subjected to something during this time, which we are no longer being subjected to now, obviously. But the scientific community made such an outrage to this. Some people are opening up to it, and coming over here, There is another paper. This was, I remember somebody linking this, and this is pretty much, they're saying DNA is a fractal antenna to electromagnetic fields. And when you come over to the right hand rule, use your right and left hand. Point your two middle fingers in towards each other and put your index fingers in the opposite directions. Right and left hand. Middle fingers pointed in at one another. Index fingers pointed in opposite directions. As a result, your thumbs will point in the opposite directions, and you basically just recreated the structure of your DNA using your own two hands in a simple known principle to the field of physics. Why that applies here, it might not be applicable to the moon. This probably, if you look at this probably came way before we even had a moon. So things were under certain conditions, but coming over here, this is scary. Some of these articles are good, but this is kind of scary. Catastrophism and uniformitarianism are two schools of thought on the history of evolution. They're implying evolution. Anyway, though uniformitarianism is the only view that has sound scientific evidence to support it, that is not true, by the way. Catastrophism is the idea that quick, large-scale, catastrophic events created the universe. And that is blatantly false. But note, who is the one promoting the Big Bang Theory about what? Exactly. A large-scale, catastrophic event that created the universe. And mind you, I will link this so he can show you why there is evidence to... This is just pretty much one of the four pillars of the Big Bang that this guy completely destructs in this and shows how false that theory is. But if there's no evidence to support catastrophism, we're going to talk about this because there is. Let me just go down to... Here we go. This is the argument of uniformitarians, that the broad topographic and geographic features of the Earth were produced by earthquakes, floods, volcanoes, and other natural causes acting consistently over long periods of time at the same frequencies and magnitudes we now observe. Think about that. Come over here to these scars and tell me slow and gradual processes, winds, waters, erosions, can put semicircle shapes on the face of the Earth with cohesive patterns wrapping the entirety, shaping entire continents just by wind, water, and erosion. Cohesive patterns. I doubt that. But while we're talking that scenario, mind you, the uniformitarians are very adamantly opposed to the notion of catastrophes because it supports the people who were directly opposed. It supports their opposition. So, no sound scientific evidence to support it. But let's go over here to a list of mass extinctions. Mind you, these are all based on the uniformitarian mentality where you imply hundreds of millions of years. So you have to wonder how many of these actual hypothetical extinctions are being separated. Even though they say big 5 extinctions. So that's 5 whole mass extinctions. But again, in their view, there's no sound scientific evidence to support, because it's just all these different mass extinctions. And you know what? Oh, by the way, it's all your fault. Who is the one here blaming now mass extinctions? All of the mass extinctions within the known human time frame are all caused by humankind, apparently. Going back to here, what did I say? Who's the one now blaming you for the catastrophe, supposedly, that is being caused? This is all your fault. Anyway, just scroll back, because this is the one that killed the dinosaurs. Mind you, this one, they don't even mention the Ice Age. Like, global cooling happens here, I guess. These are climate changes, massive volcanic eruptions, humans, all your fault. Because you needed to eat food. Again, back to the 5 monkeys experiment. Did I mention that one before? I don't know. All these are hypothetical, well, for the most part, hypothetical mass extinctions. Based on what? Based on uniformitarian mentalities. That's scary to think. But I want to talk about this. Not so much just in terms of the flaring dwarf star and what all that entails, because there is your primordial soup equation. That's what we're missing in our equation, is a tidally locked Pangaea Earth. We started at some point like this, I believe. And this arrangement actually explains how those features become common. When you go over here and one side experiences excavation, the other side experiences accumulation, you throw some water on it, you have a Pangaea Earth. You don't throw the moon at Earth, you basically have a duplicate of Mars when you come over to here. Not, oh, that's the moon. This is where I was saying it's just the 90-degree shift over. Otherwise, we'd be the same. But yeah, it's all your fault. And they really talk about this like this. It has become dogmatic in the school of scientific realm. Like, it's no longer scientific. You're not allowed to question uniformitarians. And if you say catastrophism, they're automatically grouping you with the creation of the entire universe, even though they're the ones that proposed the myth about the creation of the universe against all known laws of physics. The frustration levels are through the roof here. But when you put in, from a catastrophist perspective, if you have close encounters between two or more bodies in this solar system, and those close encounters are accompanied by increased dosage of electromagnetic radiation, there's your source for rapid mutation that happens directly after the extinction events, in which completely different environmental changes might have been brought forth, but your DNA has the ability to sense those changes in the environment and adapt to those situations. It's not so much that you're evolving to all these different catastrophes that had to take place throughout time. Do you think that's an evolution? If you're getting like worse and worse as time progresses and you're just trying to survive through how many catastrophes? Oh no, it's all your fault. Just remember that. This is what the scientific community wants you to remember, that it's all your fault. Wow. Um, but just stuff to think about, and I'm gonna have to talk a lot more. I'll try and link what I can. I This stood out to me very profoundly. And when you apply it to this equation, applied to this equation, applied to what we have today, it actually makes sense. So that's kind of a basis for the hypothesis. There's obviously more to talk about. I'll have to put stuff together in a better presentation so I can actually sound like a doctor or something better than just a bum. Anyways, take care, everyone. Good night. Bye-bye.